How's it going, folks? I bought the 14-inch MacBook Pro M1 Max the day it came out, and I've had it for about a month now, and I want to run through some of the things that I love and a couple of things that I wish were a little bit better about this device. So let's get started. The first thing that you'll notice is how this machine looks. As soon as I took it out of the box, it's very different than the previous 2 or 3 generations of MacBooks. It goes from much flatter, sleeker design. It's a chunkier laptop. Apple has moved away again from trying to make these devices thinner and thinner for the pro market and embrace the thickness. And in doing that, they've done it in a true Apple sense and made it glorious. It's got a flat surface on the top, it's got flat sides with ever such a slight curves on those sides. It really echoes back to the MacBook Pro, the first MacBook Pro that came out in 2006. As soon as I took this MacBook out of the box, it felt familiar. It didn't feel like the previous 3 or 4 generations. It felt to me like the very first MacBook that came out. I believe Apple took that as a source of inspiration when they shifted from their G4 version over to their first MacBook Pro, and then they made it into the unibody in 2009. They've taken some of those design principles and added it to this latest device. With previous models, Apple went out of their way to try and curve away on the insides to make things look as thin as possible. With this device, they're embracing it. It's chunky. I think one of the notable spaces where they've made it chunky is on the screen. It's a lot thicker. When you look at it in side profile compared to previous versions, it's a much thicker screen, and I appreciate that. We needed better cameras, which I'll talk about later, and we needed better displays. So embracing that has been great for this model. The other thing about the design is there's noticeably more cooling. This is the first time that Apple is really showing those cooling vents on the sides, because they're doing their best to cool those incredibly powerful M1 Max chipsets inside in these devices. They're going to need more airflow. Although I would say in the entire month that I've owned this device, I have never heard the fan ramp up once. So moving on from looks, the second thing is performance. So there's lots of people who are better at doing performance graphs or speed graphs than me. So in terms of numbers, the 14-inch MacBook Pro M1 Max does not stack up as well as the 16-inch. The 16-inch, even though it's got the same specs, does actually outperform it. And you can see that from some of the graphs. But what I would say is, for me, the most important thing was portability and performance. So I've had 16-inch devices for years. I've always gone for the bigger devices. 16-inch last year, the 15-inch before that, and 17-inch going back, back to when they used to do the 17-inch. But they really are, you end up lugging those around, and there's a big compromise you pay carrying those bigger, heavier devices with you places. And I've really fallen in love with these really powerful, smaller Macs. Of course there are compromises, and I'll talk about some of those compromises in terms of trying to do editing with this screen or working on the go. The way that I use my computer is I bring it with me to the office, plug it in and have a separate screen for it there and all my devices around it. Or I'm at home and I plug it into my own. I've got a desk here with all of my dongles set up for it. So I'm actually very rarely using it as a laptop. It is fantastic that it's portable and I can bring it with me everywhere. And of course I could do video editing on it if I had to, and I know a lot of people do. They just use this device. But for me, the compromise of going for the 16-inch just for that bit more performance really wasn't worth it, given that I do bring it from home and will increasingly be bringing it into the office again. So the graphs are one thing, saying that it's a fast device and that it's much faster than previous devices, but for me it's about perception. Does it feel faster? And holy God, does it feel faster. It is in a league of its own. I can throw anything at this machine and it absolutely crunches through it, no problem at all. Fans don't turn on, doesn't heat up, just smashes through the work, everything I give it. I use it all day long for my work. I work in software development at a tech company, and I use it in Final Cut Pro to render videos. I'm on a podcast with one of my mates, so sometimes I'm working with several streams of 4K footage which are over an hour long, and this machine has been able to churn through that. I've never heard those fans ramp up during that time. An absolute monster. I would say the overarching sentiment for this, the way I feel about this, is it's awe-inspiring and it's really confidence-inspiring. So there's literally no task that I feel I can't take on with this device now. To put that in context, prior to this, before I received this a month ago, I was doing all my video editing on an M1 Mac on my desktop, which I thought was great. It was the 8GB version, but it was much faster than previous generations, but it's a different league altogether compared to this laptop. I also had the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro fully spec'd out as well, and it is, again, I would say it's twice as fast as that device compared to when I'm talking about putting it through its paces with Final Cut Pro, doing all those complex edits. It's much faster. I do find it to be a real performance enhancement. It's the best laptop I've ever owned, not just because it's the most modern one. Of all the laptops I've bought through the years, as they've been the most modern machine, this is the biggest shift in performance that I've ever seen in a device that I own. So let's talk a little bit about the screen. There's a couple of things, some pros and cons. So it's a mini LED screen, which means there's some true blacks and that it's more energy performant, and it's a much crisper screen. In fact, it's an XDR display, similar to the Pro XDR display that Apple charges $5,000 for. I really love this screen. It's great, it's bright. As I look at it now, it's crisp. You know, it's much better than my eyesight is in terms of what I can see on it. It's a really great display. Of course, we can't really talk about the display if we don't talk about the notch. I don't really care that they put a 1080p camera in behind a notch. I assume in future they're going to do some Face ID and things like that with it, and they just couldn't squeeze it into this model. I don't notice the notch. I've had this laptop for a month. I stopped noticing it the first hour after using it. I really don't know it's there. I'm an iPhone user, so I guess I already black out the notch, but for me it really wasn't a consideration, not a concern at all. I think it's iconic, honestly. I like that Apple's embracing it. It's across their ecosystem. I welcome the notch. So if you read the specs on this screen is a really bright screen capable of doing up to 1000 nits, and it's a fast refresh rate at 120 Hz. Honestly, I can't tell the difference. I've opened my old MacBook against this new one. I really can't tell the difference in the 120 Hz display. It is certainly brighter, but they also do scaling of brightness. So the majority of the time, this display runs at about 500 nits. So part of that is marketing. It's capable of 1000, but a lot of the time it ramps down to save on that battery life. It's a phenomenal screen, I'm not knocking it, but the numbers, the 1000 nits, 120 Hz, largely a marketing thing. Great screen, great monitor. So in summary, with the screen with the 1000 nits of brightness and 120 Hz display, I think that it is an upgrade, and you do feel that upgrade, but it's not the same systemic shift you feel from the processing power. It's a minor upgrade on previous monitors, and I welcome that as well. Looks great. Sticking with the camera, the 1080p camera is a welcome upgrade to it. It's still not 4K, I think they could have done more, but 1080p along with the machine learning algorithm that they use to enhance the images, I think it's a solid camera. I still plug in an external webcam when I'm on calls, but if you're out and about and you need to use the camera, at least it's not as grainy as it used to be before. It's passable now. I would say it's on par with other laptops, which, not a great boast, but given how bad the camera was on these displays before, while they were trying to make them so thin, I think it's a welcome upgrade. Tea break. Next, I want to talk about the ports. Thank you, it has the ports. So in order for this to be the device that I can port everywhere with me, using at home, using at the office, and not have to bring 2 kilograms of dongles with me for all the different things I want to do, having these ports on this device is so welcome. Let's go through what it has. On the side, it's got a full HDMI port. It's got Thunderbolt 4 ports. It's got an SD card reader. It's got MagSafe 3 charging. This is the third different size MagSafe charger, so if you've got previous MagSafe chargers, your charging won't work on this. You'll have to get a different type charger with a bigger power brick, but it is fantastic. I'm a big fan. So some of the things that I did notice is that the HDMI port on this is 2.0, not 2.1. It's not the most up-to-date HDMI port. The thing that is noticeable is the SD card reader. So in this we have an SD card which is UHS 2 as opposed to UHS 3 or even SDE Express. When I'm uploading my memory cards, I plug this machine into a hub, an external hub, and I've noticed that it is actually slower to upload my photographs when I plug into this SD card directly than to one of my faster external hubs, which is a little bit weird. But I think it's great. It's got an SD card reader in it. You can do all your stuff on the go. To me, it doesn't matter that it's not the fastest SD card reader. I'm just glad that we have it back. So let's quickly talk about the keyboard. A brief bit of background. Apple has a history of breaking things that are working great. They had the scissor switch keyboard in their previous models. They switched to the butterfly switch, which was notorious for breaking, much shallower and less satisfying to type with. And they've gone back to a scissor switch design with this device. And I love typing on this again. It's absolutely the right thing to do to go back to that. The black keyboard is kind of hard for me to keep clean all the time. They've moved away from having their aluminium in between the keys. It looks nice, it's very pretty, but for me it's a grease trap. You're going to be cleaning this keyboard a lot if you want to keep it clean. It looks very dirty very quickly. So that's a very small minor gripe, but it's a fantastic keyboard. I love it. I'm glad they went back. The best thing about this is they got rid of the touch bar. of all the MacBook computers I've used, that's the most annoying thing Apple has ever included in their design. I really didn't like it from the start. I did own a couple of devices that had the touch bar in them, but I've sold them and upgraded as soon as I could get away from that technology. I'm so glad that their Pro devices now have moved away from that. One final thing on the keyboard, there is Touch ID on this keyboard. I found it to be a little slow. It's certainly slower than iPhones used to be when you'd have Touch ID on those buttons for logging in. I think there's like a 1 second pause. I put my finger on it, takes a second, and then you're in. I'd like this to speed up over time. I'm sure it is something that they'll improve, but I'm finding it a little slower than I thought I would. So what about the sound on this thing? What about the microphone and the speakers? The MacBook Pro M1 has what they call studio mics on this. Apple devices have always had really good microphones and some of the best speakers you can get in a laptop device, and this is no exception. I would say the microphones on this are better than they've ever been before. I find myself just using the microphone on this all the time instead of plugging in an external mic, even when I'm sitting at my desk with all my devices around me. The microphone this is good enough to run by itself. The speakers are great. The 16-inch MacBook Pro has phenomenal speakers, and people are really saying how great those are. And the ones that are here in this 14-inch are obviously smaller and less powerful. They're a little bit less clear, they're a little bit less good, but I would say they're phenomenal for what you get for the size in this device. I'm really happy with both the microphone and audio quality here. If you're using these things on the go and you don't have headphones, you'll be happy using this device. So you can probably tell from this video, 1 month in, I'm really happy with this device. I would recommend the 14-inch for anyone whose portability is important for, and if not, go for the 16-inch device. In terms of looks, performance, screen, camera, and audio, this is the best laptop I've ever owned, and I'm looking forward to getting even more use out of this over the next 6 months. It can handle everything I throw at it with ease, including video editing, really large 4K files, 1-hour videos, no problem at all for this device. If you're thinking about getting one and you can afford it, I would say go for it. Thanks for watching.